6 years ago. When I was 33, about 6 months to the day after I got married, I was diagnosed with follicular lymphoma. I had no idea what it was. I had had a couple of lumps pop up on my neck about a year prior that were not, we did an ultrasound and everything came back as normal, but I noticed a couple of other lumps and bumps popping up in my groin and under my arms, and we went through so many tests to try and figure out what was going on. Ultrasounds, mammograms, x-rays, blood tests, and everything was coming back as normal. But having enlarged lymph nodes for no reason is generally not a sign of normal. So the doctor continued to, we continued to go along investigating what the issue was. And I kept researching and everything kept coming back to lymphoma. I tried every other possible thing that this could be, and it just seemed that all things led to this type of diagnosis. But all my tests were coming back normal. I felt great, I was fine, and ended up getting a CT scan, and that came back to query the lymphoma, which came as a bit of a shock because, you know, now over a year had gone, passed, and I was still fine, and my blood was still fine, and we did a biopsy, and it did come back positive for a type of slow-growing lymphoma that I'd never actually heard about, even though I was doing all this research. For someone my age, it's quite typical to get something a little bit more aggressive, and because lymphomas are generally well responsive to chemo, I wasn't too concerned about it. I just thought, oh, 6 months, I'll take a treatment, everything will go back to normal. So when the doctor let me know the type that it was, considered terminal and incurable, and he said something like, you know, the good news is you can live quite a long time with it. The bad news is it's fatal, and you know, you should have a good 10 to 15 years before you run into any trouble. You would think being given a 10-year life term was pretty decent. I just wasn't there in my mind. It was a death sentence regardless, and I quickly fell into a suicidal depression and couldn't get out of bed and didn't know how I was going to cope. I had just gotten married, and I didn't have kids yet, and it was really traumatic. But the literature does say that 10 to 20% of people heal naturally from this lymphoma. Using conventional medicine, they can prevent the death from occurring and make it a little bit, slow down the process, but it's actually curative through medical treatment. So I knew very quickly that I didn't want to go down that path if I already knew that all it was going to do was postpone the inevitable. And I wanted to investigate this 10 to 20% of people that heal naturally. And when I brought it up to the doctor, they told me that the figure was so small and the probability of it actually happening was so small that it wasn't even worth investigating. And I found that really confusing because we know that if you do full body radiation, 10 to 20% of people go on to develop a leukemia, and it gets aggressive and it's incurable and they die, and so they don't give you a treatment. They won't give you that treatment. But then if you have the same probability for a natural healing, that's too small of a number to pay any attention to. So I found that really confusing at the beginning, and I wasn't really able to think. I recall just spending a lot of time terrified, in a high states of anxiety. I had no B symptoms of cancer whatsoever, but as soon as I got diagnosed, I was getting night sweats and panic attacks and losing weight, and none of it had to do with the cancer. It had everything to do with my mental health and just inability to comprehend this, I guess at the time would have just been sentence. I was like, how am I supposed to live knowing that I'm going to die? Everybody knows they're going to die, but no one's actually been told that that's what's going to happen to them. And in that question, that began this journey for me on how I was going to do this. How was I going to wake up every day and live, knowing that I was going to die? And it ended up expanding from there into this investigation into the death and into what that meant for me and what was normal about it, and accepting that death occurs. And really at any age, it didn't matter, it was just younger, but it didn't mean that death doesn't happen to younger people. And so that was initially what I started to look at, like why did I fear this and why does everybody else fear this? And I started going to some lymphoma support groups, and I realized very quickly that that wasn't the place for me to be. You find a lot of people with this type of lymphoma in those groups because it's such a long-term condition, and everybody was so focused on chemo, even though treatment might even be like 5 or 7 years from the moment that we were at. And I was so perplexed on why everyone was so focused on taking chemo when we knew it didn't work. We knew it didn't work, but there was this other path, this other option. And my husband's actually an ER physician, so this whole thing was, he couldn't help me. And we felt so helpless and desperate, and we spent many nights crying to sleep together. And he also started researching, trying to find out if there were any clinical studies that I would be able to join, or any type of treatments that were new. Generally, people with this condition are 65, and you go on to live. If you're living 10 to 15 years, you kind of get a full life expectancy. So there's not a lot of research for people like me that's not a good enough figure. And he started researching, and an article came out with the British Medical Journal like a couple of days before about a woman that had gone to a fasting center and had healed completely from follicular lymphoma and followed a whole food plant-based diet. So we started doing that right away. And eventually I made my way to the fasting center. I knew that the fasting probably had nothing to do with it. I had seen the woman. She just didn't look like somebody that was eating a whole food plant-based diet. She didn't look like me. She was a little bit overweight. I could tell she wasn't following the diet, even though I was regimented and doing everything I was supposed to do. And I just didn't have enough guts to speak to her at the time because I wasn't ready to hear the truth. I was so scared that it wasn't going to work for me, and it worked for her. And there was some regression from the whole experience, but really in general, no change. I was doing IV vitamin C therapy. I was doing IV turmeric, IV, I don't know, all kinds of things. I was supplementing, I was walking and exercise. I was doing anything I could possibly do to extend my life matter to matter. I did spend some time with a healer for a couple of weeks who was very similar to what Dr. Joe taught. And on that first healing retreat, the Heal documentary had come out. And I have no idea what Dr. Joe said, but I remember him being in it. And I had immediately downloaded a couple of his books and a couple of meditations on Audible, and proceeded over the next 5 years to read all the books and I would meditate. I would do his meditations sometimes, but I wasn't generally consistent on a daily basis. One of the things that I realized with other people that healed is they seem to have like one thing that they were really attached to, that they believed in, and they seem to have like an unwavering belief in whatever it was, and a knowing. So I was piecing together I was piecing things together that made sense to me. I recognized that I didn't feel that. I didn't feel that particularly towards the diet. I didn't feel that towards fasting. I didn't feel that towards vitamin C therapy. And I remember one day, maybe a couple of years ago, I'd gone through the last 5 or 6 years without really much change in my health. it was pretty stable. And after the birth of, I also had 2 children in the middle of all this. And after the birth of my second child, things started to change for me physically. My blood didn't come back normal anymore. I was feeling new lymph nodes all over my body by the day. My liver started to enlarge, and my spleen was getting big, and I looked pregnant all the time. I had part of having an enlarged liver makes you look like you have a distended abdomen, so I looked pregnant, and we had wanted to have a third child, but things were starting to look a little bit scary, and I had tried so many different things in so many different ways to get this in control or reversed, and I was out of control. I knew I was in trouble, and I ended up getting pregnant for the 3rd time and losing that baby, and the doctor recommended that we didn't continue down that path, that it looked like it was time to start considering conventional therapy, and that, you know, he'd given me a lot of time to kind of do whatever it is that I've been doing for the last few years and on my search and on my journey. And he's like, but you know, stuff is starting to look like we're heading to a transformation in this cancer, that it might go aggressive, and you know, you're fitting the criteria to, you know, start treatment, and I want to do a biopsy, and we're going to do a PET scan and do all this kind of stuff, and we're going to have to start to get ready to do treatment. And for the first time over the last few years, I had no extra cards to play. You're looking at the data, you're looking at all the tests, and I couldn't deny what it is that he was saying to me any longer. Before, I used to be able to be like, but everything's fine, son, I'm fine, and I still was. And I went to have another treatment, vitamin C therapy, and I would always listen to Dr. Joe's meditation there. I didn't particularly like this one, but I would always force myself to get through it. And I remember asking him, you know, do people heal from this? And he said, yes. And I said, well, how many people and who? And he said, from every 100 people I see, about 10 heal, which I was floored. I thought that was a huge number. And I asked him why they were different. And he said, they just know. And they believe in this work, and they believe in this therapy, the vitamin C, and they do not let anything else get in the way of their belief. They don't let anybody or any physical test or doctor or anything get in the way of their focus and what it is that they're looking to achieve, and they put everything into this. But that discussion made me get up and never go back again, because I knew that I did not have that type of commitment to the therapy that those people had. And I went home, and finally, after I think 5 years, went on Dr. Joe's website and discovered that he did events. And of course, at this point, we're like well into COVID and everything's been canceled. And I was like, this is it. There is nobody else that I've seen over the last 5 years that fits the criteria that I was looking for. Every time I see a post on Instagram, it resonates with me 100%. I feel it, I believe it. And I just was like, I think there's nothing else. I've tried everything else. Nobody can save me, nobody can fix me. And I have never fully committed to something like this. It's always been really half sort of kind of, let's try this, let's try that, let's see what's gonna happen. And bearing in mind now, like, I'm now really desperate. I'm getting really scared. Knowing that I've got this biopsy coming up and that I've got to start planning for treatment with 2 children at home. And I started watching the intensive and progressive courses and set an intention for no biopsy. And I didn't know how that was gonna look, but I finally was starting to let go of the outcome and just kind of make a statement and just let it go and show up how it was going to be, because I was always saying things like no biopsy because everything disappeared in a minute and I'm all completely healed and cured, as opposed to just being like no biopsy and focus on being gracious for that and just let it go. And you know, I only had about 3 weeks before signing up for Marco Island in November last year. The biopsy was a little bit before, and I had had a PET scan, and the PET scan was really scary. It was just lymphoma all over the place. But when I had gone to the doctor, he had said, it's not really uptaking too much sugar. Like, the cancer's there, it's definitely behaving like a cancer, but it's not aggressive. It's still indolent, it's still slow. And so I don't need to do a biopsy. And so that was my first, oh my God, okay. That definitely didn't show up how I thought, but we're still there. I was able to get to, and he said, let's just let you have Christmas, and we'll look to let you get Christmas, and then we'll look to starting treatment in the new year. And I was like, okay. So I showed up to Marco Island in November 2020. I knew as soon as I sat down that this was what I was going to be. This was it. I just knew. I knew that this was the commitment, the thing that I was looking for the last 5 years. I knew that if I didn't devote this to myself and commit to myself, that I didn't do absolutely everything that I knew about, and that no matter what had happened, I wanted my children to know that I did absolutely everything. And I had a couple of really wonderful experiences there. I left and committed every single day. It was a complete and utter devotion to myself. I decided that every Dr. Joe live or leaving the monastery was going to be like going to church, and I made sure I had the time allotted in my day to attend those events. I had my next appointment when they pushed that through automatically with the oncologist. It was March 1st, which I was like, oh, well, I got an extra 3 months after Christmas, like another 2 months after Christmas. So I was really quite surprised about that. And thinking, I was in such a dire situation that I needed to start treatment right away, and now I had all this time. So I had a lot to work with when I started to get scared, and I started to lose belief a little bit, that because everything was staying the same, I was always constantly touching my body, touching the lymph nodes, trying to see if things had gotten smaller. And I had a couple of, anytime I got upset about it, I just said, don't worry, you've got 4 months. Like, just let it go. It's going to happen in its own time. And really working through that kind of mental anguish that I was experiencing. And we had a bit of a challenge over Christmas to do the pineal gland meditation. So this is now about 8 weeks later. I'm definitely feeling so much better in life, although nothing's changed, and I can't really explain what was going on. My meditations were fine. I'd been a long time meditator, so to sit and do an hour and a half was not a big deal. The biggest change was all the noise, all the music and all the guidance. So it took a while to transition to that type of meditation. And I remember I had made the commitment to do 3 out of the 5 days of the pineal gland meditation because that's what I could fit in. And on the first, and they were just not the same as doing it at an event. It just didn't go as fast. It wasn't as easy. And by the, I didn't feel refreshed and happy for the rest of the day. I felt tired, and I was cranky, and my kids were annoying me. And so by the 3rd day, which at this point, I'm like, what am I doing? Like, why am I getting up? What am I doing this for? I was really angry, and it's 3:45, I was getting up for 4, and the fight that I had that morning was incredible. I went into my little meditation room and was just like, what? I was so angry with God. I was so angry that I had to do stuff like this to, look, what was I doing? Why did this happen to me? What was I accomplishing? Nothing was getting smaller. Nothing was working. I was so angry. But I couldn't stop. It was like not even me. Like I had to press play. I had to sit down, and I was like, I made this commitment, but who did I make the commitment to? Dr. Joe didn't care if I had done this or not. Like, what difference did it make to him? No one else knew that I was doing it besides my husband and myself. But I had made that commitment back in November at the events where I was like, I have to give 100% into this. And I guess that's where that drive came from. I sat down and I don't know what happened to me. It was one of the most beautiful, loving experiences that I've ever had. I was engulfed in love and gratitude and sweetness, and someone was caring for me and caressing me. I do not recall following the pineal gland meditation at all. I don't know what happened in those last, in those 4 hours, but I knew that I never, ever doubted the work again. And I had finished it and I went to have a bit of a nap, and when I woke up, my husband came to ask how it went, and I was in tears. I couldn't speak, I couldn't express. I had no words to describe what had just happened. I needed to just be for a little bit. And that was a really huge day because I never doubted the meditation again. It never took me any effort or work to get up and sit down ever again. I've proceeded, now we're gonna fast forward to earlier this March, and I have my appointment now. Nothing has changed. I had a really difficult February when I realized nothing had changed. Everything was the same size. If anything, I had a couple more bigger lymph nodes, and now was the day. Now was the day that I was gonna get told that we had to do treatment, and I was gonna have to take it because this didn't work. And I sat down to do my morning meditation. I had a really hard time understanding the instantaneousness of healing. I had listened to that lecture so many times, but I didn't understand how it could really just happen in an instant. I sat down for that meditation and found myself in my pineal gland. I don't know how I was there. I just knew that's where I was. I was in complete awe of the quantum. I understood the law. Everything made sense to me. It was probably the first real meditation I feel like I've had in that whole 4-month period. And I just understood it all. And the voice was, and I said, oh my God, now I get it. Now, of course, this is the way it's supposed to be. This is just the way it is. And then I said, but I need more time. Ironically, I was like, but I need more time. Like, this is the first time I've ever had a meditation like this in my life. And it's taken me 4 months, and I just knew that was when the beginning of the knowing happened for me, where I now knew. I always kind of knew, but now I knew I was going to heal. I proceeded to go to the doctor that day, and COVID was rife, and he's just like, let's just wait until you get vaccinated. We don't want to start you on treatment this time, so let's just wait. We'll reconvene in another 3 months, so I got more time. And my husband asked this question. He just said, if she were to take treatment, are these lymph nodes gonna get smaller? Are we gonna see them regress to a normal size, and is that what's gonna happen? And the doctor said, well, not necessarily. They're so large, and we've learned over the last few years that as long as the PET scan, the lymph nodes and the cells aren't behaving like cancer, as in they're not taking up sugar in the PET scan, that the chances of long-term survival are so much longer to just leave them big. Whereas before we would want them to shrink smaller than 2 centimeters. And we were killing a lot of people trying to get these lymph nodes below 2 centimeters when they weren't behaving like cancerous lymph nodes anyways. And so they're having this conversation, and in the background, I'm like, what? What did you just say? That even with treatment, these are possibly not going to get smaller? I have spent the last 6 years touching and crying and in just complete and utter suffering that these things have never changed in size. And you're telling me that even if I got treatment, they're probably still going to be there? What am I doing? I was like, what am I doing? And in my mind, I was a completely out-of-body experience, and I'm like, I am done. It was like, I am done with this. I cannot take this anymore, and it is done. I will never touch my neck or these lymph nodes again. I do not care if they're big or small or this or that. Sabrina, you have to love yourself. You have to love this body. It is doing absolutely everything it can to keep you alive. And it is time that we respect this process, and you respect and love it. Just love everything about it, and let go of this idea that it needed to get this certain size, and if it wasn't completely gone, and if I didn't have a clear scan, it was going to be fake, you know, because I was struggling with how do you ignore the physical if you can see and touch these all the time. From there, I had 2 days later a really intense meditation. I was getting really restless, and because I've been meditating for such a long time, it was really, really strange. And my legs, I wanted to move, I wanted to do all kinds of things, and I was having a really hard time settling my body. And all of a sudden, everything went calm, and I had this huge amount of energy shoot up from my back straight through to my brain, and I fell back, and I just knew it was done. And it was gorgeous, it was fast, it was instantaneous, it was the most beautiful thing that I've ever felt in my life. I was crying, I was laughing, I was full of gratitude, joy, relief, all kinds of things. And, you know, nothing happened. Like, it's still, nothing got smaller. My blood was getting worse, but I didn't care anymore. I just knew that everything was gonna be okay. And I started to get through the day not thinking about lymphoma. Like, it wasn't on my shoulders anymore. And I realized, oh, I'd made it till lunch and I didn't even think about it. And in a few more weeks, I was getting through the entire day and not thinking about it till like 6, and then 6 p.m. at night. And I just noticed that I felt free and I was just happier, but nothing had really changed in my life, but everything had changed. And that's what I kept explaining. I'm like, I've been doing this work and I've never been so happy and gracious and joyful in my life, but I wake up every day and everything's the same, but it's not the same. And we had really been going back and forth about having this third child. It was a really tough decision for us to make because of all these fears of, you know, what if things went wrong and I had to have a treatment during this baby, and all the horrible things that the doctor said would happen, you know, and might have to terminate early or go through chemo while pregnant. And you don't want to ever think about these things. But we had this desire that we can't explain to have another child. And it kept on rumbling and coming up. And we kept on saying, okay, well, we're not going to do this because of X, Y, Z. But then a couple of weeks later, it would rumble up again. And I know enough that that's your soul speaking, and to listen to it. And when you're trying to suppress something that keeps coming up, that you need to give it a bit more attention. We decided, when looking at the decision to try, that everything was fear-based. We were afraid of treatment, we were afraid of cancer progressing, we were afraid of having to take chemo while I was pregnant, or even just with 3 children instead of 2 children. I was afraid of dying. It would come up every once in a while. We knew that all this stuff was temporary though, and that if we had, you know, there was so much other possibility on the other side of this, and we decided to go for it, which really felt like walking the plank, to be honest. We just really had to just let go and jump and make a new life for ourselves. And we had no idea what would come out of that. But my husband just said, it'll be grand, let's do this. And I held on for dear life. I still didn't get pregnant right away. I still didn't have much regression, but I did know that the cancer stopped because I didn't have any new lymph nodes pop up since March. And I never imagined that just the act of trying for a baby was going to be the catalyst for seeing some regression and change. And right before I went to Denver, the week long, I had had another meeting with the doctor, and I had the worst blood tests ever. And I walk in, and I'm in the room, and he has the test. He walks in, and I'm just like, I don't know what to tell you. I feel amazing. I've never felt so good in my life. So I'm either right at the brink of some sort of crazy change, or this is gonna explode and I'm gonna die. I don't know, but it's just not lining up with how I'm feeling, like, at all. And he just said, listen, Sabrina, he goes, you're meeting the criteria to start treatment. You know, it's progressed to your blood, your liver's enlarged, your spleen's enlarged, there's lymph nodes all over the place. He's like, but I can't ignore the patient. I don't even know who you are. You look so good. I've never seen you look better. You're mentally strong, you're emotionally stable. And he's like, what are you doing? He said, I think, and I told him a little bit about what I was doing. I told him about Dr. Joe. I told him just about the work that I was doing and how I'm just completely devoted to it. And it's changed my life, and I was so happy. And he said, you know what, let's just give you a little bit more time. Let's see where this goes. I'll watch you closely and we'll see what happens. I was just delighted. If you can imagine, at one point having the worst blood tests I've ever seen would have sent me to the grave already, but I didn't care. And I just knew something was happening. And when we were in Denver, Dr. Joe kept talking about the blood for some reason, and about people that come up to him and say things about how their blood just isn't changing, but it doesn't make any sense because they felt so good. And this was exactly what was happening to me. And I just continued to, do the work and just overcome it, just not care. Now I started to want to do blood tests because now I'm like, no, I know this has to change, and I want to see them get better. So instead of fearing these tests, I started to look forward to them and plan for them. And I would arrange my meditations to lead up to the day that I would go and get them, and just work on the intention, the elevated emotion. And, I was having the best summer and we discovered that I was pregnant, and I was delighted and never told the oncologist because I was like, what are they going to say? Repeat the same stuff again? Well, you might end up needing chemo. And I just thought, I don't need to listen to that. I already know what could come out of it, but I never imagined that what would come out of it was a near complete regression of all the swollen lymph nodes in my neck and shoulders, and that my blood would return to normal, and that it appears that my liver and my spleen are returning to more normal. And that I just had the best year of my life. I don't know how else to put it. I had hurt my shoulder a little bit, and I had gone to touch it, and when I went to touch it, nothing was there because I stopped checking all the time. But I knew I had over 30 lymph nodes up my neck and up my shoulders, and they were all gone. And the only ones that were left were the originals, the first ones that popped up, that are now the size of peas. And they're not even worth CT, like doing a CT scan, and nothing's big enough to biopsy. I don't even care. My blood, the next blood test I had when I went to the oncologist, saw my red blood cells return to normal, the morphology of them return to normal, my platelets return to normal. My white blood counts were a little bit high, but they had dropped half of what they were the last time that I had gone in. And I've just been delighted. I look back at what I've been through. It was an amazing experience. I'm grateful for every second of it. I have had the best year of my life, and I think have been of more service to more people than I have ever been locked down in my house for the majority of it. Helping to heal other people, even just connecting to the field when I'm by myself. It's a lonely game, and I guess I just wanted to tell my story so that people know that they're not alone, and that every time you sit down, you're making the world a better place, changing the collective consciousness, changing the dialogue on healing. I really wanted to do this work at home and to heal at home, because you always heal when you leave home, and then you kind of come back, and if you don't change your environment or get over your environment, you find yourself stuck again. And I was very aware with that, and bearing in mind that all of our colleagues and friends do not believe in this type of work. So I knew that if I could rise above that, I would be okay. There was a lot of work, but sometimes it just felt like it was me and Dr. Joe's voice in my ear, and nobody understood what I was going through, and he did. And he always knew what to say, and he always knew when to say it. And it can be a really lonely experience, but we're all here together, and it was really just the best thing that's ever happened to me. And I hope that other people don't give up. We keep on doing this, and just see what happens. Who knew? So I'm now due next March with my third baby. And we'll see what the future holds, but It's been pretty amazing so far.